Pro-life talk. Real world answers. This is Life Report.
Welcome to Life Report. I'm your host, Josh Brahm, here with Gabi, Vehrs, and my good friend, Steve Wagner from Justice for All.
Great to be here with you again, Josh and Gabi.
We're talking about something that I think I started thinking about differently after I read your book, Common Ground Without Compromise, which everyone should get at commongroundbook.com. You said something interesting in the beginning of the book. You started talking about the terms, because basically you had to write a book about pro-life and pro-choice people having dialogue, and you had to pick terms to use as you wrote the book. And it's the same thing that happens in our seminars. We're going to do an 8-hour seminar where you guys maybe 4.5-hour seminar talking about abortion. We have to, there's no way to do this without using kind of labels, even though I think probably all of us don't really like labeling people. I have this discomfort with putting people under this label that is probably inaccurate to their view. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about some of the labels that get used and how we could think about them better and how we could use them better, because I think it makes sense if you're writing a book or if you're doing an 8-hour seminar to just make labels and define them like we do. We basically say, look, we're just going to use the terms pro-life and pro-choice, and here's what we mean by them. By pro-life, we mean people that generally think abortion should be illegal, and by pro-choice, we mean people that generally think abortion should be legal. But that's different when people start talking to each other, or more likely yelling at each other, or debating each other, or getting online and, all of that. And
caps with exclamation points on Facebook. Yeah,
and symbols and angry smiley faces or emoticons and all that. So let's start by talking about the terms that we label for each other. We got terms like pro-life, pro-choice, pro-abort, pro-abortion, anti-abortion, anti-choice. Let's just talk about those terms for a little while and how we as pro-life people and even the pro-choice people listening in should think about them.
Well, I think the principle that I was reflecting on as I wrote the book, Common Ground Without Compromise, was I was attempting to write a letter to pro-choice and pro-life people, people on all sides of the abortion debate or the abortion discussion, whatever you want to say. I wanted all of those people to feel included and to feel like I was talking to them. And so that meant that I needed to reflect on the terms pro-life and pro-choice, which are the typical terms, and see if I was comfortable using those. There is a thread of thought in pro-life circles that we should call the pro-choice position the abortion choice position, because it's more accurate. It reflects the position that those folks hold more accurately. I'm open to that. I've used that term, abortion choice. The reason I don't use it in a dialogue, if I ask somebody, are you pro-choice? The reason I'm using the term pro-choice is because it creates fewer impediments in the conversation. If I say, are you abortion choice? This is a term they've never heard before. It's a term that it's new to them, and then we have to define it. Whereas if I say, are you pro-choice? And they say, yes, or as Kristen said this week on campus where we were doing outreach, Kristen said, when I asked her, are you pro-choice or pro-life? She said, well, I'm both. See, she didn't want to be, she knew those labels have certain things attached to them and didn't want to register her opinion to attach to either of those things that she's seen in the media or whatever.
The polarization of the two views. Yeah.
So I use the term pro-choice not because I think it's more accurate to the actual position that the person holds, but because I don't think any term is very accurate, and because I have to ask the person about their position anyway. And so why don't I just use a term that they're used to and then let them define it for me in the conversation?
So I think some pro-life people would argue, well, look, okay, maybe I even agree that none of the terms are accurate, but you just went with the least accurate of all the choices. I mean, pro-choice what a weasel word that is. They're just like, that completely neutralizes abortion. And it's just like, oh, it's just all lovely. And, we're just, pro-choice about everything. And most people are pro-choice about most things. But some choices are wrong. And now you're just kind of letting them get away with this sneaky rhetorical, power play move that ends up shifting, who's kind of winning the debate. So how would you respond to pro-life people that say, okay, you're using the term pro-choice, which is the least accurate of all the terms for the other side?
I think it's a great point if my discussion with the person is 10 seconds and I get 2 seconds to ask a question and they get 8 seconds to respond, and that's the end of it. So if that's the situation we're in, and the end of the discussion is going to be them naming themselves or saying that they're yes or no to some name I give them, then I guess that point would be important to consider. In my conversations, I want them to go on for 30 minutes or 90 minutes so that I see real. We can build the kind of rapport that can then bring about lasting change in the person's mind. And that's why we focus so much on dialogue, because we believe that's how people change their minds. So when I think about what terms I'm going to use in a conversation, I'm thinking about that long term. How can I build the rapport and build a sort of context, a relational context in which the person can start to reflect on their beliefs and can start to think, well, maybe it's safe to change my mind. Even if I'm not going to tell this person, Steve, that I'm going to change my mind, I at least can start to reflect on that. And that's why I'm using the term pro-choice, because it inserts into the conversation fewer stumbling blocks. And then if I said, so are you a pro-abort? I mean, just think about how that would feel on the opposite side. If somebody said, are you a pro-abort? It just has even the ring within the word itself, or the sound of the word. It sounds kind of negative or
not kind of. It sounds like a slur to me. When I hear that, I'm like, ooh, that sounds almost like a curse word or something. Or
Right.
I've got a question for you, Steve. I think there are some pro-life people who would say, yeah, when we're talking to pro-choice people, maybe we should change our manner and our demeanor to allow as much dialogue to happen as possible. But when it's just the pro-life people hanging out, we can use whatever term we feel is most beneficial. What do you think about that? How should we talk about pro-choice people, or how should we label those who generally think abortion should be legal when it's just the pro-life people hanging out?
Well, I think that every conversation we have with other people, and even with ourselves, we're building habits. And so I would just suggest that if on Life Report, as we're sitting here talking about these different people's perspective, if we use terms that aren't going to go well in dialogue with someone of that perspective, then we're probably not helping ourselves. I guess what I try to do in conversations with our staff, or conversations with just pro-life volunteers where we're debriefing from a day of outreach, we try to maintain the same attitude towards those who disagree with us that we were trying to have during the day. And it's not just because we're not just doing that as a means to an end or something. Okay, we're going to treat them nice so that maybe they'll change their minds. No, we genuinely think they're human beings who deserve respect, and so we think they deserve our respect when we're talking to them, and they deserve our respect when they're not in the room. And that's a challenge, right? I've been in debrief sessions where we start talking about somebody at outreach who was maybe annoyed a lot of people because the person was really proud of their perspective, or they thought they were definitely right, and they were treating people who didn't have a college degree like they were just less than or whatever. Maybe it was a professor, and he looked down his nose at one of our people who was like a high school student. Well, I don't think that's I think we have to be careful in that context. What if he was sitting here in the circle? Now, you can go too far with that, because you might say, well, never talk about anything. that's controversial or that's difficult. No, as a community, we have to process those things that are difficult, but we have to try to do it with a sense of maintaining respect for the person. So
yeah, I hear that, but I think I want to say something else about the term pro-abort or even pro-abortion. I'm not just choosing not to use that term around pro-life people or around pro-choice people because I don't want to get into the habit of saying it, because if I say it to a pro-choice person, it's going to shut down the dialogue, although I do think that's true. That's like this kind of pragmatic reason, but I also have this principled reason where I don't think very many pro-choice people are actually pro-abortion. I think pro-abortion implies, unless you mean pro-abortion choice, which I do think is accurate, it's just weird to say, and cumbersome, and I'm not going to do it a lot. I might write it occasionally, but I think it implies this idea that you volunteered for Planned Parenthood once, and you read a couple of pro-choice blog posts, and you saw a bumper sticker, and now you're repeating that slogan to me, which is about as far as it gets for a lot of people that we talk to on campus. Mm-hmm. We're not talking a lot of people that have been studying this for 10 years. Mm-hmm. You think abortions are a good thing, and you think that abortions should be happening, and you you feel really positive when women make that choice to have abortions. There's this implication about like their character and what they think about abortion, where most of the people I've talked to, and there's a lot of people, don't think abortion's a good thing. They think it's a bad thing. It's like they've got to defend the legal right to have it.
Let me push back against what you're saying for a second.
Okay.
I think sometimes when you'll see the term pro-abort, it's online. There's a pro-life advocate who's talking about someone who is tearing down a pro-life display or who is holding up the sign, free abortion on demand, no apologies, that sort of thing. So it actually does seem like that person, at least, is pro-abortion in some sense, and so they call them a pro-abort. So someone who's using that term might say, well, no, in this case it is accurate. And so what do you both think of that?
I'm not, when someone says, no, this person thinks this, I want way more information to defend that view. I'm like, I don't know what that person thinks about this. They might be holding this sign for, there's other possibilities.
There were 3 signs out there that day, and somebody put it in their hands.
They grabbed one or whatever. Right. Or maybe they're just trolling the people. A lot of people say things they don't even mean to us just because they're trying to annoy us, or they're trying to get us to go away, or maybe they're just not thinking it's like I want to think the best about the other person. I think maybe you could argue like an abortionist who actually thinks that abortion is a positive thing and has said something like that. Abortionist at one time, I don't remember his name, but there's some abortionist that basically said, I would move to Mexico so I could give free abortions to the people crossing the border. Yeah, that guy's probably, you could probably say he's pro-abortion.
Okay, what about NARAL, Pro-Choice America? Can you call them pro-aborts?
Well, see, once again, I don't like the derogatory nature of that term, but I think they're promoting or they're fighting legislation that like we would say is pro-life legislation, and they're promoting what we would say is pro-choice legislation. But I don't know. I don't know enough about them to say that they're pro-abortion. I think they might just be like, hey, we need some organization that is standing, kind of trying to hold the line and trying to keep this, important, medical procedure legal that all these crazy men are going after. I don't know where they're at.
And so maybe their excitement about the kind of work that they do comes from their excitement that what they see as a woman's right is being preserved. So they're excited and pro all women's rights being exercised, and they're standing for this particular one that they believe is a right. And so it's not so much that they're pro-abortion as they are, we're really excited that women get to make choices even if this is one of those choices.
How many of them, so like if there's 1.2 million abortions in America right now, how many people have you ever talked to that think it should be more like 2.4 million abortions every year?
Actually, I will say, you're both going the direction here of, we don't really know what these people believe, and I'm on the same page with you. But I do think I have met some people who really, at least in our discussion, they are very pro-abortion. They want more abortions to have. I've talked to a few people like that. I'm not saying it's a lot.
You're saying like a few out of 1,000 that you've talked to?
Sure. Now, I'm not saying that means we should use the term, but let's just assume, for the sake of the argument, that there are some people in America that they want more abortions to happen. I would still argue we shouldn't use the term, and here's why. I think that if we call someone who thinks abortion should be legal pro-abort, I think that it communicates something more than just something about that person to the general audience member. I think the person who's reading that blog post or watching that YouTube video or whatever is lumping in, without trying, everybody who thinks abortion should be legal into kind of this category. And so if we use this term to stand for just this one person who might be clearly wanting more abortions to happen, or they might say, I love abortion. I mean, I think there have been a few people, or even a T-shirt campaign or something like, I loved my abortion, or I can't remember. Do you remember that campaign?
Something along that line.
But let's just say that there's people like that. I think there's like this residual impact of calling them a pro-abort, and that is a 19-year-old college student who just got involved in her pro-life club goes online and watches a YouTube video, and she absorbs a certain kind of attitude towards people who disagree from that. And I think that's really detrimental to her conversations that she's going to have. And she's going to have to correct that. She'll figure it out. If she has dialogue with people, she'll figure it out on her own, or somebody maybe who's in dialogue with her will help her to see that's not really helping her conversations.
Okay, so we've talked about a couple of labels that pro-life people sometimes use about pro-choice people. Let's talk about a couple of labels that pro-choice people use about pro-lifers. I see anti-choice getting thrown around. I see anti-abortion getting thrown around. That's probably the two most common. So let's talk about both of those. How do you feel about the terms anti-choice and anti-abortion? Do you prefer one over the other, or do you feel like pro-choice people, like if you could advise pro-choice people to refer to pro-life people and with one word, what would that be?
Well, the general principle that I try to follow is call people what they want to be called, because you're going to have to ask more questions about what their position is in order to have that name have any real content to it anyway. So I would just say call us pro-life. But I'm fine with being called anti-abortion, because I am anti-abortion.
Right.
I mean, I am against abortion. Now, I said to someone on campus this week, I said, well, I'm not against any abortion that doesn't kill an innocent human being. Or sometimes I'll say, well, if the unborn is human, if the unborn is not human, then I'm all for abortion, or I'm for at least a legal, abortion being legal. I'll sometimes try to bring in the reasoning to my position right into that first sentence. But absent that, I just say call people pro-life who say that they think abortion should not be legal, so that you're not creating the same impediment to conversation that we were talking about. But if somebody calls me anti-abortion, I sometimes might even say, well, what do you mean by that? So I can know whether I actually, whether that's a good term to describe my position.
Because if they're bringing in all these other things, like you must also, like the girl who talked to me today, I was like, you must think that women shouldn't have the right to vote. That actually happened this morning at Fresno State.
Really?
Yeah, she was a treat. I want to be like, no, that's not me. That's not who I am. If you just mean my position on whether abortion should be legal, fine. I'm fine with that. But if you're bringing in all these other things, I would like you to know, if you're willing to believe me, and she didn't, but if you would be willing to believe that some of these things that you think are character flaws just don't describe me. So what do you think about the term anti-choice? A lot of people I see this probably more often than anything by people that are actually trying to be careful with what words they use. They, as far as like on a strategic level, they want to call us anti-choice. Let me just get your guys' Gabi.
Well, I think my first reaction to that is, if you are using language like anti-choice, you are pro-choice, you are labeling yourself as a particular kind of pro-choice advocate. And at least those that I've noticed using language like that, and the reason why they're being strategic is not to take pro-life people and their ideas seriously, but to do a very deliberate kind of polarization and very strategically for the use of their own side. And I think, ultimately, I care about real dialogue happening and us getting closer to the truth together. So I'm not going to be for that if that's your intent and your motive behind it. And as a pro-life person, I react to anti-choice. It's like, well, I'm for a lot of choices.
Right.
Which choice are you telling me I'm against?
So then here's the, I think, good question that a pro-life person could ask the three of us if they were able to be in the studio and debate us, is they would say, okay, what if all the pro-lifers, the millions of pro-lifers listening to Life Report, what if they all adopt your way of doing dialogue and they only use the term pro-choice? But then what if all the pro-choice people kind of play dirty and all are using terms like anti-choice and other things that have like this kind of rhetorical power behind them? Aren't we just basically tying a hand behind our back and then trying to have this fair fight? And in the end, a fair fight matters because there's babies' lives on the line.
I think I want to maybe divide some different places where you might see these terms being used. I actually don't know if I want to use the term pro-choice or pro-life in my conversations. I sometimes do in order to just kick things off or start the ball rolling. But I think it's even better for dialogue to just say, what do you think about abortion? Do you think abortion should be legal through all 9 months? And ask specific questions about the timing of the abortion and the reasons or the circumstances under which we're talking, or the circumstances of the abortion. So, do you believe in abortion for in the circumstance of the woman's too poor, or the woman doesn't want a female, a girl, she wants a boy, but she has a girl. Should she be able to get an abortion in that case? So I think it's actually better not to use the terms in dialogue. Now, what's going to happen in writing or in some kind of public forum is you're going to see the terms used. I don't think this argument, though, that you've just laid out, which is that the terms, they get to use any terms they want. They get to smear us with terms that are inaccurate, like anti-choice, not accurate to describe Gabi's position, or I think mine or yours. But we are trying to be so nice that we lose the opportunity to level the playing field.
Right.
I don't know. I think my thought on that is it's good to have good manners, and it's good to love people that hate you, even if it doesn't get you a good pragmatic result. I feel like I would be violating my conscience or doing something that's wrong in order that good may come, or in order to get a good result, if I were to, I guess, use the same kinds of terms or name calling that I feel like the other side, quote unquote, right? I don't actually see them as the other side. I see them as people, right, who are engaging in, a certain, medium. They're using a medium to get their message out or whatever. I don't want to give them a free pass, I guess, but I don't think I can start calling them names that I think are, more like names than helpful.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, Steve, I care more about my personal responsibility and how I represent the pro-life movement to people who I want to persuade to believe in the humanity of the unborn and that abortion should generally be made illegal. And if that's my goal, I'm not so concerned about the names I'm going to be called by the other side, as you stated, Steve. Well,
what if lives are on the line, though, Gabi? That's the question, right?
See,
what if a baby loses his life because somebody was persuaded by this anti-choice rhetoric, the rhetoric about being anti-choice and being anti-woman and all of that. And we have our principles. We're doing good over here on our side, or living according to what we know is right, but babies die as a result.
Right. And well, my first response is that is not my responsibility. I'm not responsible for their actions that result in lives being lost, because they've chosen to use a term that I don't think is helpful. I also am not convinced that us calling them pro-choice instead of pro-abortion is going to save more lives. That hasn't been presented to me. But
even if it did, isn't that just basically a utilitarian argument? I mean, if I'm a moral objectivist that says, you know what, I'm going to kind of obey my conscience, and I'm going to follow my moral principles, then in the end, isn't the right response to kind of do the best that we can do to be Jesus to people, to treat people like image bearers and leave the results to him?
I think that's definitely really true, and I don't think pro-life people should take the responsibility on themselves that being nice to people is going to cause more deaths.
Okay, so here's the last question. There's some people that I know are agreeing with what we're saying, and I think one of the questions that might be going on in their mind is, okay, so what should I do now? I'm on Facebook, and I have 400 Facebook pro-life friends because we just, hey, they had 80 mutual friends we just get this kind of pro-life community going together on Facebook. But now I see all these people, whether they're kind of in a professional capacity, or maybe we're just a bunch of amateur pro-lifers that share YouTube videos and podcasts and articles and all that. And I see a lot of my Facebook quote-unquote friends using these terms that I wouldn't use. Is it so bad that I should actually engage them? Should I send them a private message that says, hey, maybe check out this episode of Life Report, or maybe decide this is why I don't use that term? Or should we just kind of let it go? Short answer, Steve.
What I do in campus outreach when things happen between a pro-life and pro-choice person that I think is not very productive, and the pro-life person is doing something that I think is harming the conversation, I sometimes will jump in and ask that person questions. So I would do the same thing on Facebook. I might even do it in a public way, and I'd say, I noticed you called this person a pro-abort. What does that mean to you? And then I can actually weigh whether what they said it means fit with the person's position, maybe even let the other person say whether they think it's accurate.
This has been Life Report. If you want to comment, we would love to hear from you. Go to prolifepodcast.net/180, and you can scroll down and leave a comment. We'd love to engage with you there. And remember, you can always have a great impact in conversations if you remember to ask good questions, listen well, and find genuine common ground when possible. Have a great week. Go talk to someone.
You've been watching Life Report, pro-life talk, real-world answers. Life Report is produced by Right to Life of Central California. Visit their website at fresnoprolife.org.